Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the 2017 Surface Navy Association's annual symposium and trade show. Our coverage here is sponsored by Raytheon, and we are absolutely honored to have with us the star of the show, Vice Admiral Tom Rowden, who is the commander of the U.S. Naval Surface Force. Sir, thanks so much for taking time and talking to us.
Great to be here, Vago. As always, this is the best time of the year because we get to celebrate surface warfare for an entire week.
That's right. It really is awesome, and it's a great opportunity. And I was telling somebody this is, I think, my 25th one or something like that. So I'm really honored. You've been working the challenges of the Surface Force, planning for the future now for 5 years, both in your past job but also in this one. And you've just issued your new strategy. Tell us a little bit about what you're trying to achieve and why this is so important, given the operating environment the Navy's going to be in now, as well as looking 10 years out.
Yeah, so the Surface Force strategy titled The Return to Sea Control. Really what I'm trying to do with that is to get people lined up and understanding exactly what the contribution is of our Surface Force to the Navy fight, to the naval fight, to the joint and combined fight. And to get and really it's a way to communicate to the men and women that are serving on our ships, the men and women that are serving in our sister communities, and certainly our brothers and sisters in the United States Marine Corps. It says, hey, this is what we're all about. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to go get after it. And so this is what it is we got to do. This is how we're going to go do it, and this is how we're going to get after it.
How do you address those? I mean, your dad was a prominent leader in the service community. It was an honor meeting him just the other day. Sea control obviously was something that there are those who say that, hey, look, this is something the United States Navy has always done. For 240 years, it's been about sea control. What are some of the new and more subtle elements of this that you're bringing to the fore in terms of the mission going forward?
Yeah, I think it has to do not necessarily. But certainly, I mean, as my conversation long ago with Admiral Hank Mustin was, the Navy exists to control the sea. I think that's important. I think it's also important to bring out the fact that everything we do that's important for the nation comes from our ability to control the sea, specifically project power or do a lot of the other missions that we have to do. You have to control the sea and the skies above it.
Deterrence also a key factor of that equation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, certainly a deterred fight is much better than a fight that you have to go scrap it up in. So, I mean, in my mind, it's all about conventional deterrence and making sure that any potential adversary understands that, when they wake up, today's not the day. If we get to that point, I think we're in good shape.
In terms of the threat environment, we were talking. I was at a conference where somebody put up a slide about the capabilities that China has, the number of weapons, the systems and the ways that they can target now on that to be able to reach out to greater and greater ranges. Obviously, that's a challenge that you've been working on, and your team and the entire Navy team has been working on. How does that change the nature of the fight? And distributed lethality has been one of your core signature initiatives. Is that lethality at ranges that are sufficient to outrange what the other guy has, right? At some point, it does become a stick fight to an extent. Are the sticks we're developing longer than the sticks than the other guy's using?
Yeah, I think certainly a more distributed lethal force is at the center of not only distributed lethality, but I think how we start to exert sea control on our potential adversaries. And clearly, the two areas that we're really concentrating, or the three, but really the two, I believe from the integrated air and missile defense perspective, we've got a great family of weapons and weapon systems in order to be able to address the threat appropriately. Clearly, I think in the long-range anti-surface and long-range anti-submarine work, we're working very closely with our requirements folks, and we're working very closely with industry to see what options there are. And there are some really great options out there in order to get after this extended range at which we want to be able to hold the adversary at risk.
Do you, what are some of the experiments, insofar as you can discuss them, right? Experimentation has been something that's important to you across the force to try to get to these new novel operating concepts. You have Zumwalt now that's out on the Pacific coast, and that's going to be going through workup. Obviously some teething problems there, but then that's also seen as a key experimental tool, but also an operational tool. Talk to us a little bit about some of the experimentation you're doing to get to those more effective con-ops in the future.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at the leading edge of that, but what I'll tell you is this. Certainly from the wargaming that we do, and we've really stepped up the execution of wargaming to understand and to start to be able to kind of ferret out exactly where we want to go with respect to the analysis that we need to execute, and then from there how we would then go put those forces together in order to do that experimentation. The other thing I think that's it's important, and probably an additional step in there, is to get after what I would say, going into the virtual and constructive environment and building those systems out in order to understand, A, what the most effective ranges are, what the most effective tactics are, techniques and procedures in order to be able to go address the threats that we see emerging.
It looks like there's going to be an increase in defense spending. Folks don't know exactly how much it's going to be. When you're looking at your force, you have significant, you have a passion for ship maintenance, because if you can't get it off the pier and you don't have any, and you have a lot of casualties, that ship is not really all that effective for you at the end of the day. With a smaller force, obviously you're putting greater stress on it, right? It's a very complex equation. But you haven't yet gotten a lot more money in order to resolve those problems. How much money do you need to fix the problem, and what are your priorities? If you had more money, and I'm sure you've communicated it to the CNO, but what are your priorities? What do you need money for, and how long does it take you to be able to bring your force back to full readiness and full health?
Yeah, complex equation. What I would say is this, and I like to talk about the center of the universe. The center of the universe are ships, our men and women that serve on our ships, and making sure that they're confident in everything that they do and competent in the execution of their responsibilities, and especially confident in their ship that they're standing on, right? And so, but I think that there's a number of variables in getting after that readiness equation. Certainly one of them is funding, is fiscal. Another one is how well we're doing in the planning, in understanding the material condition of the ship, the planning for the execution of the availability, the coordination of the availability, and working very closely with our industry partners in order to be able to execute that. And I'm happy to say that I think we're making some pretty darn good progress with respect to eliminating the waste in the processes that drive the prices up. And so certainly, while I think more funding is certainly part of the equation, I think it's also really important to focus on the fact that there are things that we can do within the surface force to get more bang for our buck in the maintenance that we're executing. And so, and I look at the two big commodities that I'm driving after is reduce the amount of time that I've got the ships and the availabilities, and reduce the cost of the availabilities, and that directly results in an increased readiness not only from the perspective of the ship, but also from the perspective of the crew. More time to train, less stress on them and on their families. And so it's a big, complicated equation, but we're certainly getting after it.
What are some of the ways you're doing that, right? You said there were a couple of ways of doing it. What are some of the ways that you're finding that you can do that?
I would say first and foremost is there's a lot of entities that are involved in the preparation for the execution of an availability. There's maintenance pieces that have to be done. There's modernization pieces that have to be done. And so I think it's important to understand what deferred maintenance we have, and that's well documented. I think the material condition of the ships must be well documented. We have to know what the material condition of the ships are. And the crews are really coming online with respect to all that documentation that has to occur. We're moving people to the exact ships as we plan out modernization. We used to just, in order to save money, if the ship was deployed, we would just execute a ship check on a similar ship, but they're not identical. And so as you're planning out the execution of modernization, you really got to take the team out and you've got to look at that exact ship and understand what it is they're doing. Discipline in the process with respect to design changes or drawings that have to be modified in order to be able to give them to the planners in order to be able to plan them out. We weren't doing a very good job of holding the planning yards accountable for the products that they had to produce in order to be able to get the plan executed properly. And so as we've driven discipline into the process, we're getting those plans out, or we're getting those drawings out on time. We're getting all the information that the planning yard needs and that the private yard needs in order to be able to go get after that the execution of the availability, and it's driving much more efficiency into it.
Let me ask you two ship questions. Ship question number one, obviously everybody's looking at the next surface combatant and what that looks like. And obviously one of the more important things is, what does the next cruiser look like? What are the capabilities the next cruiser needs? Yeah. Which I know that you've probably spent a little bit of time thinking about.
A little bit.
We've got the Flight 3 coming on, which gives an extension on the destroyer line, gives the Burke greater capability, better radar, more power generation capability. Obviously the LCS, the frigate version, but both versions are going to be on the on the lower end, on the frigate side of things. But what's your thinking in terms of what this next cruiser needs to look like, given, again, the changing threat environment, magazine size, a whole bunch of factors that go into shaping what that ship's like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have had the great good fortune of serving on 3 of our guided missile cruisers. USS Texas, one of the old nukes back in my JO tour, and then
awesome ships.
Awesome and beautiful.
Yeah.
Not that all of our ships are, of course, beautiful.
No, they're all gorgeous, but the fact that you had a little bit of range and some speed, nobody ever says that's a bad thing. Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah. So, and then I was a combat systems officer on USS Bunker Hill, forward deployed, and I was the executive officer on USS Chosin. As I look at the evolving, and so we singled up those ships to be the command and control platform for the execution of anti-air warfare, and they're phenomenal at that. But the world has changed, and the threat has changed, and so we've been able to adjust the combat system and the command and control capabilities of our Ticonderoga class cruisers to evolve to the threats as they evolve. And I think what we need to do is, before we start saying it's going to be this long, this wide, have this many cells, or whatever the case may be, is to understand the capabilities that must be resident in that future surface combatant in order to be able to execute all of the command and control responsibilities that they have to execute. And I think first and foremost, that's the execution of the command and control of the integrated air and missile defense, which is obviously getting kind of more complex by leaps and bounds as we press forward.
Right, and the ships are also integrating air into it also, right? Some of the experimentation and focus that you have on getting F-35C pulled into this entire node network system.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly there's an evolving number of sensors, and how do we bring all of the data that we're generating to bear to create understanding in the minds of the decision makers in order to be able to execute that potential fight.
One of your other challenges and pledges has been making the littoral combat ship work as a battle force unit. You do have a number of those ships right now. I'm getting the high sign, so I'm going to very quickly ask you this question and ask you for a quick answer. So those ships, you've got a number of those ships. You're trying to accelerate them out into the force, but there's also a lag, and they're not likely to make a deployment this year. What are some of the challenges of getting those ships out there into the force to be, part of, because the Navy depends on these ships to serve for a variety of missions, whether it's mine, anti-submarine warfare, and even anti-surface warfare?
Yeah. Certainly, we've executed a review this past year. We've made some adjustments to the program in order to get after kind of the drive to get quality operational availability forward with respect to these ships. And so there's a number of things that we've done, but basically, as we've worked on those recommendations to stabilize and simplify the program and to create ownership on the ships. And I've got a great team put together out in San Diego. We've already got 2 ships home ported in Mayport. We've got a number of ships. The trimarans will be home ported on the West Coast. And as we build the divisions, as we build the command and control structure, as we build the maintenance structure and the training structure, I'm confident that as we press through 17 and into 18, we'll be in a position to be able to start deploying those ships.
Sir, thanks very, very much. I've got a bunch of other questions, but we're going to come out to San Diego and see you there. Thanks very much.
Tell you what, come on out anytime, Vago.